If customers were constellations, advocates would be the stars that shine just a little brighter. But spotting them, that takes more than a telescope and a CRM, doesn't it? Welcome to the Loyalty Talks podcast, the space where strategy meets soul and customer marketing finally feels human. I'm Aparna, and after nearly 2 decades of building advocacy and loyalty programs, I know one truth. Customer voices are the strongest currency a brand will ever own. This podcast is for marketers who turn users into superfans and quiet work into industry shifting impact. Whether you're launching your first program or leading a global engine, join me and my expert guests for honest conversations, real blueprints, and zero gatekeeping. Pull up a seat. This is the Loyalty Talks podcast. Today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who embodies the art and the science of customer love. Shannon Howard, Senior Director of Customer and Content Marketing at Intellum. Now, Shannon's redefining how brands connect education, engagement, and experience into one cohesive customer journey. He's one of those rare marketers who knows how to turn content into community and programs into purpose. So, when I wanted to talk about finding advocates hiding in plain sight, there was really no better person to have this conversation with. Shannon, thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love the alliteration in the intro for sure.
Your journey in customer and content marketing is what excited me the most. And it's one of those stories that blends creativity with clarity. I read a little about you. I went ahead and saw a couple of your podcasts that you've done. The recent article that you shared, that resonated so much with me. So I realized that, okay, this is going to be exciting for us. But before we dive in, I would really want to know, how is it that it started with customer marketing and what's made you fall in love with this space?
Great question. I think like a lot of people, I fell into customer marketing. I didn't really know it was a field. I didn't know that you could choose to be in customer marketing. It was just something I think, that I fell into because my first like corporate marketing job, I was actually a curriculum developer for an online school. So I was community was a part of that program. And so I was in the communities, managing community on the education side. And then I moved into marketing. And so for me, it just always made sense. Like I have this deep relationship with a customer because I'm on calls with them and I'm teaching them and I'm in community with them. But then as I'm marketing the program, it made it so easy for me because I knew these people like the back of my hand. And I think that's the part that I've always loved about marketing is just really getting to know people and then being able to speak to them. And you mentioned in the intro, like turning content into community. I loved that because I'm like, yes, actually, that's what that's what I want to do is use everything as an invitation to conversation.
Oh, wonderful. I love that. I know we have a lot of different questions here, but I feel anyone I talk to about customer marketing, they all have this kind of thing that it wasn't really planned how we got into it. And
Mhm.
it just carved its way. How do I say? Like realizing that you were meant to build these bridges, but it all came up as
Mhm.
initially a coincidence, and then it all started integrating well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like you're just kind of saying yes and working on different projects and maybe you have this mindset around how do I do what's best for the customer and serve the people that I'm marketing to. And then later on you kind of find out, oh, that's actually a job and I can do that and I can focus on that.
Absolutely, yeah. But tell me something. Now that we've started this conversation, in our earlier conversation, when we started talking about the topic and choose a topic, you said something to me, which was that customers aren't just today's users, they are
Mhm.
also yesterday's believers and tomorrow's fans. I love that. It reframes how we think about advocacy. Can you go ahead and unpack that for us? Like, how does that mindset shift really change the way we approach marketing and advocacy?
Yeah. So I like to think about the definition of customer being very broad. So you mentioned not just today's customers, but yesterday's customers. So our fans and friends who maybe were former users of the product and they changed jobs, or maybe their company had to cancel a contract, but they didn't want that, and
Sure.
they're still fans. And then tomorrow's fans. I have people who never closed, their deal never closed because something happened in their business, but they're still fans and advocates for Intellum. And so if we expand that definition of customer, we can find advocates anywhere. We don't have to limit it only to the current users of our product. But I also think that's helpful because I was just talking to someone earlier about how I think sometimes what happens with customer marketing is now you have one person or a subset of marketing that's thinking about the customer instead of all of marketing should really be thinking about the customer, today's
Correct.
customer and tomorrow's customer. They should be thinking about who is this person because that person doesn't change when they cross the closed one deal threshold like threshold. When they become a customer, their job is still the same. They're still the
Hmm.
same person. They work for the same company. It's just that now they have access to your product. And then I think when we start to think that way, we build content and programs that support users across their journey. And then our product is like a part of their journey and it's a solution, but they still have the same pains and problems. It's just that now maybe they have our product as a solution of those pains and
Yeah.
problems. So I found that helpful in thinking not just kind of customer marketing wise, but as a marketer in general, how do I keep the customer front and center?
Yeah, I like that perspective. It's actually that customers and your advocates, it's not going to change or reset every quarter. We have to go with that flow. We have to have that kind of thing ready, that it's that thread that's going to keep us together and reconnect with that similar belief, I feel. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, Now that we're talking about marketers, I know you and I both share the love for customer personas. They give us that clarity, but sometimes we tend to box them in. We cannot move beyond it. What happens when we stop chasing the perfect persona and start looking at the broader ecosystem of people who
Hmm.
who help us influence loyalty? And I'm not talking about just our current customers. It could be our former customers, our fans, our followers, even future users. How do we go ahead and stop chasing the perfect persona?
Well, I think personas can be helpful in right. I do think a lot of marketing teams are completely disconnected from the customer. Who is this person? What wakes them up at night? What motivates them to do their job? Like really understanding who are these people. And that's where I think a lot of messaging just doesn't connect because we're not actually thinking about people. We're thinking about our product. So I think in marketing you can do like people, pain or problem, and product. I think a
Yeah,
lot of companies just are very product focused. Nobody cared. Like nobody woke up in the morning thinking, I would like to buy a product today. They woke up with their own pains and problems and their own like
absolutely.
real human experiences. So really getting to know people in general and not you think about like, I don't know, we've probably all done a personality test, behavioral profile that
Yes.
gives some definition to like who we are and how we think and how we operate. But that's not, there's so much nuance to the human personality. I talk to people who maybe share the same personality profile that I have, but how it manifests in our life is totally different. And so leaving some room for that kind of nuance part of the conversation and thinking less about, I think, well, I've been thinking a lot less about kind of role based personas and more that problem pain based, like what is going on in the mind of the customer more than just like, who are you? I took some notes before our conversation too, just like to try to think around this. And I wrote, like, how can we involve people in our story without putting them in a box or trying to make them fit certain criteria? So I think
Mhm.
sometimes when we get so boxed into our persona, we're speaking to like this set of criteria, and maybe we're accidentally excluding people who are actually part of our message and they
Most of the times, you're right. Yeah, most
yeah,
of
so
the time.
how do we cast maybe a broader net? And that's the hard thing because you think sometimes we want to be like really specific and focused and targeted because that's what marketing best practice tells us is like pick a persona and pick an audience and like and be super niche and specific. But I found even in some of our content and communications that people will read something and say, well, that's nice, but I'm not blank. And so how do I how do I help them to see, okay, maybe I'm not talking about in my world, you have like customer education, partner education, and learning and development, employee education. Maybe I'm talking about customer education, but some of that applies to learning and development too. How do I help you see the overlap and not make you feel like, oh, this isn't for me because I'm explicitly talking about the customer, you know? How do I help you see that use
Yeah.
case more broadly?
I really like that because there are times that we are also in that rut of, looking at one particular persona that we don't realize that it's advocacy. Certainly, it might just be a sales oriented thing. And I don't deny that, yes, you need to have persona somewhere. But I think when it comes to finding the perfect advocate or nurturing a perfect advocate, it might just be beyond a single perfect portrait. And
Mhm.
I give a lot of analogies on my
Yeah.
podcast, but yeah,
Love
I
it.
think finding an advocate
Yeah.
looks more like a mosaic where you
Mhm.
have to put together different colors, different sizes, depth, texture
Mhm.
to create that kind of advocate program that you require or which
Yeah.
would actually thrive. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, and then you think, right, and this is where I think we could make it way too complicated, right? But you think about Laura Ramos had those like advocate personalities, the educator. I don't remember all of these off the top of my head. I think educator all the time because that's the one I run into the most. I feel like is people who they want to share what they've learned and they want to help other people to grow, right? And then there's like status seekers, people who want to grow in their career, they want to
Go
be
ahead.
on stage, maybe speak. But then you also think about different when I think about advocate personas, I have executive sponsors and I have everyday admins and I have program owners and those are different. And then you could end up with this whole complicated matrix of like what's your, Forrester advocate profile and then what's your user type and then and you can make it too complicated. Or like, how
Yeah.
do we just invite people into this story, where you mentioned earlier kind of creative storytelling. And I think we often think about telling other people's stories and they're the hero of the story. And I totally believe that from an advocacy perspective. But I think our companies, we have a story that we're inviting customers into about how we're
Correct.
changing the marketplace or how we're shaping, in our case, the future of learning. And how do we invite customers into that story so we get to, share their story, but they also get to be a part of ours and what we're building.
Yeah. That's so right. Now that we are talking about personas, I do realize that recognizing advocacy early, having that kind of eye for like minded people, but not exactly the same set of people, because you won't have that kind of variety. Tell me
Mhm.
something. What, in your opinion and your experience, actually, what are the signals to recognize advocacy early? Is it engagement? Is it attitude? We spoke about storytelling flair or a mix of everything. What do you think?
I'm probably in the mix of everything. Because there's no perfect like, you need technical users who will get
That's so
into
true. Yeah.
community with other technical users, or they'll hop on a reference call with another technical user and speak that language. But then you might
Yeah.
also have executive sponsor personas and you want them to connect with each other. I think a lot about influence. So I think in customer marketing, we deal in influence. Like that's like a lot of
Yeah.
what we have to
A
beg
lot.
and
A
barter
lot.
around the company. But also thinking about who are those personas that have influence. So who knows how to like work within their company to influence other people to use our product, who can open doors into other business units or who can make the case into the business where maybe they don't sign the check but they have a lot of influence with the person who does sign the check or the people who are
True.
making the decision,
Yeah.
where sometimes I think we discount people and say, well, they're not the buyer. But I was like, for years, I feel like I've said, hold on, walk me through how your team buys. Because I don't see a lot of executives doing product research. They don't do all the research. They give that to someone on their team who then makes a recommendation. So, how do we actually work with that person who has the influence on the recommendation? And how do we value them, give them the input that they need to make a recommendation to their executive who, yes, is signing the check, but they're not really doing all the research?
You've expressed it so beautifully because when I was writing notes regarding this particular question and how you may or may not respond, I did write this line that it's not always the loudest voice that
Mm,
takes space in advocacy. It's sometimes those quiet consistency efforts that you see where someone's really invested.
mm-hmm.
Those those are the ones who like show up, and it's not necessary whether there's a spotlight or not. Those also matter. Like,
Mm,
that's where the gold is, where there'll be some who really influence that kind of activity and what we're pushing. But then there are
mhm.
some who drive the consistency to make an advocacy effort successful.
Yeah, thinking about how do we surface the right opportunities to the right person. So I have advocates who are not loud, but they will be the first to adopt new features and functionality, and they'll provide a quote, they'll participate in betas and give us feedback.
Yeah.
They'll get their team on board to try something new. And so those folks have value too, even if they're not doing a case study.
Everything's not about a video testimonial or a review, to be very honest. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And but like not thinking that advocacy is only external, but there's
Oh, yeah.
actually things that they do within their own company, within their account that they do for your company beyond just maybe being a reference or a case study or a video testimonial.
Absolutely. Now that we've spoken about this, you're sitting right at the intersection of content, programs, events. These are some very powerful advocacy touch points. Now, how
Mhm.
does each of these contribute to building loyalty for you? Like, what's
Mhm.
the secret to keeping them connected under the voice of custom?
I think where I'm sitting now is a really unique opportunity where I think often customer marketing is seen as advocacy. How do we capture the voice of customer? How do we distribute the voice of customer? And because my team is thinking very much about how do we weave the customer into everything that we do? So, how does
Yeah.
their voice inform our marketing channels and our messaging and our strategy as a whole? How do we incorporate customers into content and programs and events? But then how do we use those? Like it goes both ways. Like, how do we use those to nurture customers? How do we pull them in and forward? Where I think in the past, I have probably like had to push a lot to incorporate the customer, the voice of the customer, the experience of the customer
Hmm.
into some of those things because it's always so focused on new logo acquisition. And now I think I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm going to do like a little loop thing where it's all just feeding back into each other, where the customers are involved in the planning and the development, but it's also meant to serve them.
No, I think integration is everything. When everything is well knit, well connected, it's more like an orchestrated success.
Mm-hmm.
Like, content sets the tone, your program keeps the rhythm, events have all the emotion that advocates carry. So, yeah,
Mm, I
I
like
like
that.
that sync. That yes, it has to be well connected, well knit, and doesn't sound alien to an advocate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When we spoke about this topic, Shannon, you mentioned there was this conversation regarding we were talking about Slack community, and you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the expanded advocacy idea that
Mm-hmm.
plays out in Slack community. I found that very fascinating. Tech tools and now even this entire AI advancement help these advocacy moments stand out. Like, what is it that nowadays, like we marketers can learn from it?
Well, I think community is interesting because often when we think about community, we're really thinking about kind of owned community. But community can be any conversation that you're having with people. So it could be communities of practice for other people. It could be those conversations on LinkedIn. Like I actually think LinkedIn can foster a sense of community and connection. So
Absolutely.
social channels can do that for us. And that's where, right? So if we're thinking about our advocates more broadly, who is our customer more broadly, I've had Slack channels like some of my customers are not in communities of practice. I call it a league of their own. They're large, large global brands, and there's so many people. You think about in the world of education, there are companies that have less than 10 people on their education team, but I have customers who have hundreds of people on their education team. So they're doing maybe a lot of brainstorming thinking internally where other people are doing it more in a community because they either have a small team, they're encountering something for the first time. So, not all of my customers are in those communities of practice, but some of my advocates are like people who they love our brand, they love our product, they love our content. And so they're sometimes bringing up, people will say, hey, I'm looking for a learning management system. Who should I check out? And sometimes it's those non customer advocates saying, like, I really love Intellum and what they do and what
Oh,
they're about.
nice.
Sometimes there's customers in there too. And that's where I think like I'm to be honest, I have found a great way for AI to surface like Slack conversations. I'm
Hmm.
still in all those communities reading threads, and because to me that's really important to understand what's
I
top
do
of mind
too.
for people, what are they thinking about, right? Like I don't want to lose that personal interaction. But I do think there are more tools now that can help us to surface sentiment, that can help us to identify advocates. We talked earlier about people hiding in plain sight or they're like undercover somewhere. And you think about maybe how many users of your product there are, and we can't possibly talk to all of those people, but they're in some way engaging with us. They're engaging in calls with their account manager or they're in community or they're doing something that we can then like AI can help us identify some of that sentiment, some of those signals that they would be a great advocate.
I, I agree to that point. Like AI does benefit with the automation and identifying it, and the humans can handle the empathy part of it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's where I haven't found AI to be the best at summarizing conversation because it'll
Mhm.
be super high level and not very nuanced, and I think the gold is often in the nuance, but it's also for me really 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 important to hear exactly what people are saying because I think the best copy and marketing comes from knowing what they're saying and how they word it, not just topically what they're thinking about. So it's like there might be a topic that we're thinking about from a content perspective that if AI just surfaced like here are trends or here's the types of conversations, but if I know like what is the question that you have around that? What's
Yeah.
confusing? Where are you running into problems? How are you thinking about this? Like that's what makes content really awesome is to really understand like what the need is, not just what the general like topic heading is.
I think you can never get rid of the human effect and how do I say it? Humanizing the experience. But yeah.
Yeah, I was reading this the other day about content marketing and content marketers using AI. And they were talking about how even with, roles that require AI or that people are using AI to develop content, there's still such a high
Yeah.
value on content strategy and people who understand like points of view. Because I'll
Exactly.
use AI to develop content, but I do a lot of like very specific, it's not just a prompt ton of information. Here's a point of view
Correct.
and here's subject matter expert insights and here's what I think is typically missing from the conversation and here's what I would add and here's what I think is really important and I'll give a lot of that context which is, hard won from community conversations and being engaged with people, which AI just isn't going to have that, like I think today we've
Absolutely.
still got to provided a lot of that human insight.
Maybe 5 years, 6 years down the lane, but not right now. Tell me something, Shannon. We both have discussed, how advocacy is and how important these advocates are, but it isn't really easy for us to quantify it. It's more of an
Mhm.
emotional, and how do I say it's often intangible. But
Mhm.
leadership looks at it very differently. They still want the metrics. In your opinion, how do we go ahead and balance the human element with
Mhm.
measurable outcomes?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have completely solved this. I do think, and I'll probably die on this hill, like, I think there's something about helping your executive team to see it as a non negotiable,
Yeah.
like, because there are things that you just can't tie dollars in, dollars out. Like, it
Hmm.
won't tie up directly, and so they have to really see the value of that, and I saw a post on LinkedIn once where someone was talking about the value of experience and customer gifting and how, their
Yeah.
executive team didn't want to spend money on it, and so what they did was they knew that that executive was gonna go to Disney, and so they hooked up and pulled all these strings to just make it, like, the ultimate Disney experience, and then that guy came
Yes.
back and she was like, "Hey, like, how this was."
HubSpot. I think HubSpot did it.
Maybe yeah, it might have been Gabrielle at HubSpot or Christy Felterusso or someone or maybe Sam McKenna did it. Someone I don't know, one of the ladies at LinkedIn. And I remember reading this and thinking like, yes, like sometimes the only way to help someone see the value of it is to experience it for themselves. Is to stop thinking like get out of the spreadsheet and and be like, "Hey, the last sales conversation that you were
Yeah.
in, like what was important to you? What is the ultimate decision making factor?" Because I can pull up Nielsen stats about like how important a referral is compared to talking to a salesperson. But like
Yeah.
people aren't sold by numbers, they're sold emotionally. And so how do I help them connect emotionally? So I think that's a huge part of like influencing the executive team is just helping them to see the value. But then I also think we have to think always like what's in the best interest of the business and the customer. Like if I'm just
Hmm.
spending money on customers and I've never tried to tie it to anything, they're gonna be like, "What the
Yeah.
heck, Shannon? Like, why are you just blowing money?" So you have to find something that's valuable to the business and to the customer. And I think you've got to run programs that are like tied to revenue. So it's impact on pipeline or deal velocity or whatever, which can be honestly like hard, depending on what your tech stack looks like or how mature your function is. So I think you've got to have those things that people, even if they're anecdotally sales is saying, hey, that reference is really important, that really helped us to close a deal, or this came from a referral, or this customer like read our case studies that really helped move it forward, even if
Correct.
anecdotally you're capturing that. But then I don't know, like I think about baking into my budget. I call it slush money. You're probably not supposed to call it that. But it's just like that surprise and delight. Like I want to bake some of that in that like, have a baby and I can send you a gift. Or you can't make it to something because you're sick and I send you a package. And can I ever tie that to dollars? No.
No.
But is
Yeah.
it part of, like, what makes it human? Like, what do we wanna do business with people we know, like, and trust, and sometimes it's those little things that say, like, "I see you, I know you, I'm listening, I'm paying attention, I
Yeah.
care." And can I tie that to a renewal? Probably not. Do I think it matters? Also, yes,
Yes, correct. I love the way you're describing, this entire balance because I always say that it's almost like trying to measure a smile.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You can't capture the full warmth with numbers. Yes, you can attribute numbers. You can definitely show an impact. Like, it's like a ripple effect through data that you
Mhm.
can show impact. But there is somewhere there would be attribution versus the actual figure. And
Mhm.
I think till the time leadership understands that, you'll
Mhm.
always have a very welcoming advocacy program.
Yeah, we probably all talk about this in communities all the time that part of our job is to educate people. It's not just getting
Yes.
customers to buy into advocacy, but getting people to believe in the power of it. And I again
Yeah.
like look at I'm like you. I like analogies and I like to look at things in other contexts of, like you have a legal team, you have like a finance team. Do they directly like, can we say, "Hey, we spent X amount of
Yeah.
money on a finance team and it drove X amount in pipeline?" No. But does it matter? Yes. Would you feel the loss of that function? Absolutely. Would that impact you? And so, if that's the case in some places, should we try to tie to dollars and cents? Yes. But I also think there's an aspect of getting people to fundamentally believe in how important the customer is to not just like customer growth, customer marketing, but also new logo.
Wonderful. Okay, now we're close to How quick were we? We've answered all the questions. I just have two more now.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's just fast forward our conversation to, and we spoke of AI. So let's just say in the next 3 years, I won't fast forward to like 6 years or 10 years, but let's say next 3 years,
Mhm.
what do you think advocacy will look like as AI, community, and customer experience continue to blend in together?
Mhm. Alright, I'm gonna look at my bullet points because I was like, I'm terrible at predicting the future. I wrote advocacy will become more integrated. So less
Uh-huh.
and I mean, maybe this is also a wish, like, maybe I'm just, like, rubbing my magic genie lamp, but that advocacy becomes more
Uh-huh.
integrated, and it's not a program and a person because I don't think it can ever be successful if it's just a program or a person, but it's actually like an overflow of
Hmm.
the customer experience that, will be and I think a lot of these tools and technologies help us to create a better customer experience from which advocates naturally overflow. AI is
Overflow.
gonna help us to
Yeah.
spot people we never would have spotted before. Like, you just think I remember going to a
Mhm.
presentation on AI at a conference 8 7, 8 years ago, and so before we were
Mhm.
using it every day and just learning the processing power and speed of AI versus the human mind. And there's just
Yeah.
we have very real human limits. and AI can blow those out of the water so it can see patterns, trends, data points that we could spend days, weeks, hours, months like sifting through data and never notice. So it's going to help us to surface people we never would have found before. Or we'll stop thinking about community as a channel and more of an experience. I just feel like across the board, I think we saw a move to digital that forgot the human, and we're seeing more like bringing it back to that human side of things where it's not like I think communities in a lot of places just became bulletin boards and like talking at people instead of how do we foster real human connection, and maybe it's online and digitally, but that like I probably both have friends around the world that like built a relationship with Slack communities or user communities or LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and you meet in person and you're like BFFs, but you've never actually met.
It took me close to 5 years to meet everyone that I've been interacting on the CMA community and LinkedIn. And,
Mhm.
uh, yes, meeting in person definitely makes a whole lot of difference. And that rapport and that bond that you connect, it cannot happen on Slack community or something. Yes, you can be there for each other.
Mhm.
Like, I would know that, oh, yes, there's a Shannon who will help me with, let's say, content strategy or something. But if I know you in person, I think the bond is like on a different level.
Totally different. Yeah.
But yes, your vision, there was this one line where you were talking about, advocacy literally being almost like invisible, but still have that presence in how a brand functions. I think that kind of vision is something that I too have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where technology can really enable that full customer experience versus, if
Correct.
your whole thing is just trying to get advocates out of what's already existing, it's like what were you doing to nurture and plant the seed so you could
Yeah.
kind of harvest that?
Okay, now that we are at the last question, and this is somehow, I recently started it. I think about 6, 8 episodes, I started doing this that, okay, you need to share the best piece of advice you've got in your career so far,
Mhm.
which is the worst one.
So the best piece of advice fittingly for customer marketing is to get close to the customer. But sometimes we design programs based on best practices or past experiences and not based on what people are saying. And I think when you really spend time with people, you learn to our point earlier about personas. It's not just like
Yeah.
who are you in theory, but who are you really? And designing for those real people and not basing it like, yes, we all have past experiences, programs that we've developed and run, things that have worked, but I
Correct.
never wanna take that for granted and just assume that that's the same everywhere because everybody's different. Every
True.
company is different, every product is different, every customer is different. So getting close to the customer, I think best advice. I didn't write something down for worst advice because I think I've gotten bad advice that was just
Uh-huh.
people not knowing how to give good feedback, but I don't think I've gotten, like, just generally bad advice, like, about career development. I think people have probably worded feedback pretty poorly. I think in general, goes kind of along with my best. Just the idea of a best practice, really, like, that's really hard for me. I love it and I want to share, like, hey, this is what's worked. But I love, like, Kat Briegeman is doing this whole series, and it's kind of like, this is what worked for me. Like, this is what I've done, and this is what experienced. This is what I saw as a result to give you ideas and inspiration and, like, some behind the
Yeah.
scenes. But I just don't think that we can take something from here, apply it here, and expect it to be exactly the same. Like, we're going to have to be able to navigate the nuance of, like, what this advocacy program look
Yeah.
like here is different here. And so just not doing something just because it's a best practice, but really along with that, best advice is getting close to the customer. What makes sense here in this context? Yeah. So best advice, get close to the customer. Worst advice, do something because it's best practice. I don't really care.
I was once told that when a leader or an executive, so that's my worst advice, I'll tell you.
Mm,
I was
yeah.
told that don't ask your leaders questions when they try to edit your strategy. I was
Hmm.
like, why would I not ask them questions? What if they don't know the program that I do and I
Yeah.
live and breathe on it? Why would
Mhm.
I? I was told, don't ask questions.
I don't know that that's ever a good piece of advice,
Oh, never.
you know? Yeah, be curious. Like, I remember a lot of how I
Absolutely.
learned was people would like, I remember even curriculum development, first corporate job, and people would be editing my curriculum. And instead of just accepting all their edits, I said, hey, can you help me understand why you changed this? Or like, I noticed that you do this. Is that because of this? And I just asked a bunch of questions because I was like, the edits don't teach me anything. I want to understand why you made those so I don't do that again.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. To be very honest, a lot of things, like even as little, okay, content definitely I feel is very subjective because you might write it a certain way and I might read it a certain way, right? I might want to tweak it, but it might just be grammatically correct. It's just that I have a different voice to it. But then at the same time, I think you can't curb your curiosity just for the sake of, oh, someone's higher up, so let me not question them. There's a very high chance, and I think over the decades that I have learned, I have realized that there are times that your executives might be looking at a very different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
which might not be the case. So it's
Mm-hmm.
better to ask them that, hey, what do you mean by that? I didn't understand, or there's no harm in questioning.
Yeah. Can you help me understand? I saw that you like left this feedback. Can you help me understand where
Sure.
you're coming from or what you're looking for? Is there something that you didn't see that you expected to see? Like just ask. Yeah. I think then you're also just learning these people, right? So I can run things like I have a CEO filter. I know the questions he's going to ask. I know how
Hmm.
he thinks. I have my CMO's filter. What is he looking for? How is he going to ask questions? But you right, those are my internal customers. So if I'm taking that best piece of advice, getting close to my internal customers, I'm trying to understand what matters to you. What's top of mind for you? What filter are you running things through? So when I'm sharing with you, I'm already thinking through that.
I love that. And on this note, it's nice that we've had such a refreshing, grounded conversation where we've reminded each other of not confining our roles and the advocates that we find under a label, rather have that persona of building a relationship, nurturing a persona
Mhm.
into something that's going to be beautiful ultimately.
I always love conversations with people about customer marketing. I just think it's a great field and there's so much to learn.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And like we're all doing something a little different. And so we get to learn from each other's successes, learnings, like the whole deal.
Absolutely. Like today, this entire conversation that we've had, my hot take from your everything that you mentioned is that loyalty doesn't live in a program. So it
Mm.
lives in a relationship, and I can
Mm.
vouch for it
Yeah.
100%.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's good. We should put that in a little like a little quote. Loyalty doesn't live in a program. It lives in a relationship. So
Yeah.
true.
Day to day, we don't realize the little elements that are part of our thinking and in our actions. When you share it with another person, I bet the people
Mm.
who are
Mhm.
listening in today to the podcast, there'll be things that they know all along. But because we are talking about it, we are addressing
Mhm.
it, that comes back as, oh, yes, why didn't I do this? Or let me look at, this particular activity a certain way. So
Mhm.
personas, I think we start off very creatively, but then we tend to confide ourselves in these boxes. And I'm glad that we've spoken about it today.
Yeah. Sometimes it's even just someone putting to words what we've thought. Like that's something that's been so helpful for me in Slack communities, LinkedIn, podcasts,
Oh, yeah.
is there are times when I struggle to put to words what I just know. And often it's in hearing someone else talk about the same thing like, "Oh, yes,
Correct.
yes, that is how like that's exactly what I think." And probably never would have said it that way.
Well, thank you so much for taking out the time today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me and thank you everybody for listening too.
If you found today's tea piping hot, don't forget to stir the pot. Share it, rate it, and bring a friend to the table. Until next time, keep turning loyalty into leverage with me, Aparna, and the Loyalty Talks podcast.